When her gaze again shifted to one of the 5 guards in the room and the smile slipped, he paused to say, "I'll return with a slice of chocolate cake, a cup of peach tea, and a bowl of buttery popcorn." At the mention of chocolate and her favorite tea, the corners of her gorgeous mouth lifted again, but only slightly. She shifted her position and sank farther into the cushions of the sofa, her shoulders wilting again. He hadn't accomplished his goal just yet, it would seem. Of course, Ethan knew Danielle was worried about werewolves, and was surely remembering when they'd invaded their home in Colorado. Now the problem had followed them back to England. But as long as she didn't bring it up, he certainly wasn't about to. After entering the kitchen, he put the kettle on first, and then collected a silver platter to carry it all. Next, he gathered a pair of cups and saucers. Of course, for Danielle, he selected the one she fancied drinking from the most, the one with pink roses encircling the cup, as well as one rosebud on the inside. He knew it was because she liked to watch the rosebud disappear and reappear as she drank. What a silly little quirk that was. Ethan smiled at the thought, and he was still smiling about that as he gathered plates and forks for the cake. Before cutting that, however, he decided to get the popcorn going. After setting a package inside the microwave, programming it and then starting it, he turned to the cake dough. But before he'd even managed to touch the cover, a loud crash came from the other room. The ear-splitting sound was followed by shouts from the guards and a scream from his wife. Bloody hell! He immediately abandoned what he'd been doing and rushed into the living room to take in the damage. Broken glass from the front window littered the floor. The thin curtains had been shredded to bits, leaving only a few ghost-like strips of material hanging from the rod. It had been raining outside, so the room was now humid and smelled of wet grass and wet animal. Werewolves were again trying to claw their way inside through the jagged opening. With a lump in his throat, Ethan watched as their guards blocked the monster's attempted entrance by throwing powerful fists into their hideous and snarling faces. Just as in the past, the beasts never got any farther than this. Some of the tension left his shoulders. They were safe. Ethan's gaze swung to Danielle. She was still sitting on the sofa, but her knees were drawn up to her chest, and her arms were curled around her bent legs. That pout he'd wanted to remove earlier was back, along with a deep scowl this time. She didn't look particularly frightened that the monthly worry was actually happening, just extremely frustrated. That was probably because this had actually become a pattern, and there wasn't any surprise in the event any longer. Every month these bloody werewolves tried to gain entrance into their home. They hadn't broken the glass like this since Colorado, though. But, just as before, the problem was being contained by the vampires guarding them. His gaze shifted back to the attack. Werewolves were not at all like dogs, as many perceived or as Hollywood portrayed them. They stood upright, were physically larger than mortal men, but the men behind the mask could be faintly seen beneath the flickering image of the beast over them. Long, hairy arms with claw-tipped hands swung at the vampires, blocking their way. Clearly they were not mindless in this state either. They obviously had a purpose and were after Danielle. He would not stand for it any longer. Cursing again, he felt his fingers curl into fists as he started toward the threat to his home and to his wife. A hand caught his arm.
"You're mortal, laddie,"
Merrick growled in a low timbre, his eyes lowered to protect Ethan from the magic there.
"Take Danielle upstairs."
His pride stung at the reminder of his weakened state, but knowing he'd be physically forced to follow the command if he didn't obey, his feet ate up the floor between where he stood and her. With a withering little sigh, she tore her eyes from the scuffle and her gaze lifted to meet his. She wasn't crying. She actually looked rather ticked off. He was angry too. This had to come to an end, didn't it? First she had vampires hunting her, and now it seemed every other magical creature in existence was after her. The worst part of this was that they didn't know why the others wanted her. Brown eyes caught onto his as he reached for her. Their fingers touched and then linked. Her hand was cold as usual, and Ethan decided with a measure of determination that he would resolve that issue along with brightening her expression. "Did you really think you could destroy me so easily?" drawled a familiar voice from the window. Ethan's eyes snapped to the speaker of those words. Lucas, although barely recognizable with the image of a beast flickering over his features. was now a werewolf.